Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, come on, come on, come on, demons. I've got this feeling.
Good evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and pathetic, embarrassing and shambolic were the words used by former Demon captain Gary Lyon to describe the D's effort last night. And you know what? He's not wrong. That was possibly one of the worst performances that I've seen from this team since Goody took over. Obviously, not counting the preliminary final, but at least with that game, I was fortunate enough to be over in sunny Perth on a mini holiday, and I got to soak up the atmosphere with mates before the game and the dreams of greatness that obviously came crashing down. But last night, I was stuck at home in ISO with no end in sight, a mask in hand, the coronavirus raging throughout the state, and no live footy in person on the horizon, and the festival of footy on TV that I'm slowly losing interest about. I don't know what more to say, but yeah, it was a pretty pathetic performance. Joining me tonight, long-time Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. And I think Titus O'Reilly really summed it up well for us all this week, or today, when he said, as a Melbourne supporter, I used to feel safe in the middle of the week. Not anymore.
That's a good one. I didn't see that. I missed that one of his. I also like the one he said about Goody being the cure for the coronavirus. I thought that was a pretty good one too. Also joining us tonight, long-time caller to the show, who's now become sort of a co-host, and I think that's been the sort of the start of our downfall, because Bin Man, every time you used to call in, we used to win, and now with you hosting, we haven't won a game since. So I think you're fired.
Can I just clarify? I'm not co-hosting tonight.
Okay,
I'm actually just called earlier. I'm a caller who's jumped on early. Yeah, George and you are hosting, so I'm happy to be the caller tonight. And there was a follow-up to the tweet from Titus to say that the contact tracers are still seeing whether Melbourne can find a kick for the D's in that game. But they could have also said find a heart, for instance, for the contact tracers.
Well, given the performance of some of the contact tracing, they might struggle to find a kick. Definitely struggle to find a good kick that hits a target. But before we talk about the game tonight, we've got a special guest tonight. He's the host of another D's podcast that you should check out if you haven't already, the Debrief. And he's also the creator and host of a podcast series called No Merger, which chronicles another dark period in this club's history, the failed merger attempt between Melbourne and Hawthorn. Here's Adrian Horton. Good evening, Adrian. How are you going?
Yeah, I said it to you boys before. I said, yeah, well, thanks, going well. And in reality, not going well at all after last night's performance. It's a bit of a dark day, to be honest. I've been on the phone to the old man talking about the malaise of the Melbourne Football Club from last night, and just wondering if it was a curse that he'd bestowed upon me as a little tacker. Thanks for that, Dad. And just talking to various Melbourne supporters today about the fact that I thought we were beyond the performance that we saw last night, Andy, but clearly not. There's still a mental fragility at the club that lingers around like a bad smell, and I think Titus O'Reilly summed it up really well in his piece today, and I jumped on the Demonland forum as I always do. I've been a long-time observer. I'm not a poster, and I saw some great comments, some ruthless and honest feedback from your community about last night, and I think we're just fed up, lads. I think enough is enough. We've got a talented list, and they're not being maximised at the moment, which is so bitterly disappointing.
It absolutely is. We're going to talk about all of that later. Well, first, I really want to talk to you, Adrian, about the podcast series that you've put out about the merger. I think it's really, really good. at the time, the issue of this failed merger, attempt between the D's and the Hawks, it was extremely contentious. It stirred up a heap of emotions amongst the membership bases of both clubs. It's certainly a chapter in not just our club, but Hawthorn's club history that many would like to have forgotten. So what's compelled you to take this deep dive back into this affair?
I think the thing for me was I was only 7 at the time when the merger was happening. And I know that my father and my grandfather, and that's the Melbourne link for me. My grandfather went to Melbourne Grammar and my dad lived out in the country during his, middle-aged years. And Melbourne's always been an incredibly big part of my life, a fanatical Melbourne household. And I think it was just a curiosity inside of me. I wanted to learn a bit more about what actually happened during 1996, and just started speaking to a few former board members and people that were closely connected with the club about the situation. And as a journalist and content creator, I just started to dig a little bit deeper from about 2016, 17 onwards. And I guess the further I got into it, the more I realised that there are a few things that didn't sit well with me. And I think one thing that you guys can probably attest to as well is the whole "you voted yourselves out of existence" tagline or spiel that a lot of opposition supporters like to sling at us. I've never enjoyed that. So there's a bit of fire in the belly. I wanted to provide a true tale or the true version of events about the dubious voting procedures that I know a lot of the Demonland community have spoken about on your forum. And it's certainly the case. There was a lot of people locked out of the Dallas Brooks Hall. Joe Goodnick and the Demon Alternative were very much prepared to head down to the Supreme Court. I know I'm probably giving it away too much, but it is documented in Anne Ridley's book, Urge to Merge. And I just think it's not, public information, and a lot of Melbourne supporters probably aren't aware of that particular situation in the whole story or the whole saga of the merger. And that was one thing that really, grated on me that I wanted to get out there, just as from a personal perspective as a Melbourne fan. And then the other thing was just for people to understand Ian Ridley's, I'll call them valid reasons as to why he thought Melbourne should merge. Again, I'm not a huge admirer of Ian's from the perspective that he saw a merger to be the right thing for Melbourne to move forward into the future. But if you look at it through a more logical, commercial, business-oriented lens, you can understand why. And again, I think for someone that had given his heart and soul to the club for 42 years, former premiership player, won 5 flags with the D's during that golden period in the 50s, and obviously had done so much hard work for that club. I think he probably gets roasted a bit too much for my liking, just to put it into colloquial terms. And I think his side of the story as well, and obviously he's unfortunately passed away in 2008, but I just feel like maybe people went a bit too hard on Tiger as well. And I just wanted to also document his side of the story and just the reasons as to why he saw fit to propose a merger with Hawthorn. So those are the key reasons why I wanted to create this documentary.
You've released the first episode, which gives a great background to the state that the league and the clubs were in at the time, in particular the financial stability or lack thereof of some of the clubs, including our own. What do we have in store over the next few episodes?
So episode 2 centres around Hawthorn, because in episode 1, as you said there, Andy, it's about the state of the league, and Ross Oakley and Mike Sheehan do a great job at painting the picture. And then I do the little background and history of the Melbourne Football Club, obviously a powerhouse, and then, as we've seen over the past 56 years, a fairly mediocre performing football club to say the very least. And then, episode 2 is all about Hawthorn and their demise. Obviously, super successful club, won the most premierships since 1961 with 13. The next best is Carlton with 8, which is really remarkable when you think about it over the past 60 years. And then for a club of their stature to absolutely dominate the 80s, and luckily I wasn't around then to see that era. I know it makes my old man pretty nauseous and sick in the stomach because he really hates Hawthorn. But just Hawthorn being in that position was absolutely staggering. And I just, again, had to dig a little bit deeper, and we spoke to John Kennedy Jr., who was amazing and so welcoming and giving with his time. I think we spoke to him for about 50 minutes, so he features in episode 2 and just explains the situation at the time and how Hawthorn, I guess, just didn't balance their books properly, and they invested into a subpar training facility down at Glenferrie Oval, which certainly didn't help them financially. And we talked to, I won't let the cat out of the bag, but we spoke to a bit of an outsider, a recluse in some respects, and I'm sure he won't mind me saying that, but he was integral in recommending a merger between the two football clubs, and someone that isn't really a part of the rhetoric or the general dialogue out there when people think about the merger between Melbourne and Hawthorn. And yeah, he's got a really interesting role in the whole thing. It was pretty fascinating speaking to him, and so he'll have a far more public profile as a result, being included in this full version of events around the merger. And then, of course, Don Scott is interviewed, and Leon Rice is a part of episode 2 as well. And then episode 3 is all about the anti-merger groups, moves into the merger match, which is just bonkers when you think about it. Dunstall kicks his 100th goal, and Melbourne put up one hell of a fight. We spoke to Alistair Clarkson as well. He features in episode 3. Andrew Leoncelli's in episode 3. He speaks so well. He's so eloquent, and just has a great perspective, because it was his first real crack at league footy, and then all of a sudden it nearly gets taken away from him with this merger. So he's got a really cool perspective on things. Jason Dunstall is in episode 3 as well. And then episode 4, we move into the incredible scenes at the Dallas Brooks Hall. And again, I was only a whippersnapper and wasn't there, but I've got a few family, friends and people that witnessed those extraordinary scenes. And we've got Sophie Gaylor from the Demon Army, and Gary Martin, Tareks, who was counting the votes at the time at the Dallas Brooks Hall. They paint a remarkable picture of some, wild, toxic scenes at the Dallas Brooks Hall, and just capturing the whole emotion of that night and what it meant to the footy club. And the Camberwell Civic Centre gets a run, but we tell it more from the Dallas Brooks Hall point of view, with our voice actor doing his bits for Ian Ridley. So, yeah, we're really proud of the work. It's pretty captivating content. It's been a long haul, guys, and I just hope people can kind of look back and look at that time in history and reflect upon, for me, what was an incredible effort from the Demon Alternative. Yes, the voting results don't reflect that, but even Ian Ridley says it himself. It was a tiny minority that voted for the merger. Yes, it was dubious. So maybe people might look at it in a different light, and maybe it'll cast the Demon Alternative and the anti-merger efforts and just the entire supporter base in a different light as well. Because, as I said, it just doesn't sit well with me that people think that our club voted themselves out of existence. I think there's a lot more to it. So, I think you guys will be pretty engrossed by it, and I just think it's time that we document this part of our history in the right manner and with the full version of events.
So there was the Herald Sun article the other day that quoted some controversial comments made by former Hawthorn champ Don Scott in relation to the Hawks allegedly breaching the salary cap in those days. Was this something that you were aware of, that he would be bringing up, or did this catch you off guard? Or was this even brought up in your, because the no merger was associated with the article, is this something that came up in the podcast?
Yeah, it comes up in the next episode. The reason I didn't even speak about it then is just the fact that it's a 2 hour and 10 or 20 minute documentary, and the Don Scott bit goes for, I don't know, all of 60 seconds. And yes, it's a massive revelation. I understand how the news cycle works and how mainstream journalists need headlines. So yeah, it was a peculiar situation when the Herald Sun called us, because we've given them the edits to listen to, and they said, we want to run with this Don Scott bit about the revelation of the salary cap. So it caught us off guard. We didn't expect it, but then we did some further digging, Andy, and realised that, well, Don Scott's brought these comments up many times before, and even did an interview with Tom Elliott on 3OW, and I don't know, for some reason it didn't catch fire, and it didn't create any headlines that we saw earlier this week with the Herald Sun's front and back page. And I must admit, guys, I woke up on Monday. I've got a little puppy, just got a little golden retriever. First time I've ever had an inside dog, because I'm from a farm and we normally had kelpies and you put them out the back. And I got up early to put him out at about, I think it was 5:30 or 6 o'clock, and my brother was up because he's got a newborn child as well, a little daughter, and he texted me the front page of the Sun, and far out. The amount of anxiety I felt in that moment was incredible. I was like, what the hell have they done here? And I looked into it a little bit more, and they'd obviously gone out and got quotes with Don Scott himself, who approved the content and backed his claims. And I thought, oh, well, it's all good. And I think we put it in there as, they're Don Scott's words and they've never been substantiated. So from a journalistic perspective, we're not saying it's fact. And the reality is Don's come out and said that he's got reliable sources but isn't willing to reveal them. So I guess at the moment it's become a Herald Sun versus Croc Media problem. A lot of Croc Media people are saying it's bullshit, and the Herald Sun and Eddie Maguire and a few other people have come out and backed Don. So look, it's created a bit of a stir, but from my personal point of view, it's a minute in what is a 2 hour and 10 minute documentary. So I don't want it to overshadow the entirety of the series. There's a lot more to it than this little claim from Don. So yeah, as much as it's humbling to get the attention and the news and to see the No Merger podcast quoted, it wouldn't sit well with me if it overshadowed what has been a 6-month project to put this thing together. So that's the kind of way that I'm viewing it at the moment.
But any promotion it's still promotion. So if that gets people listening to the podcast, if that gets ears listening to it, they'll hear the story anyway. So
that's what my wife said. My wife said, "No, it's all good. It's all good." She was like, "I hope they keep bickering amongst each other and they keep quoting your podcast."
Exactly.
And I was like, "Fair enough."
Before the other guys jump in, they've got a couple of questions. You've mentioned the names that are appearing in the series: Ross Oakley, Mike Sheehan, Don Scott, obviously, Neil Baum, Jason Dunstall, Alistair Clarkson, Chelly. How are we able to line up such a great group? And was there anyone that you approached who refused to participate?
It was tough to get some people, I must admit. In terms of who we approached, it was a little bit loose in some respects. Like Mike Sheehan was an obvious one that we wanted to speak to, just given his credibility as a journalist.
Yeah.
And he worked during that entire time in the turbulent period of the 80s and 90s. Ross Oakley, if we didn't have him and the context that he provides to set up the series, again, I think we'd just be doing ourselves a disservice. I don't think anyone else can speak to it with the same brevity that he does. But yeah, it was difficult at times. Andrew Leoncelli, because I'm an old Zavarian as well, he was pretty easy to get to. And he's mates with a few of my friends that played footy with him down there at Old Zav, so that wasn't too hard. Neil Baum declined initially, which was completely fine, and he was very upfront about why he declined. And then I don't know, I was a bit cheeky like most, I guess, journos, if you even call me a journo. And I just said to Neil, I'd really, value your opinion and your thoughts at the time. And I know that Neil's just a great reader of the game. He's got a great football mind. And Neil, for me, actually, when you listen to him, he speaks so well. The way he sums up the situation at the Melbourne Football Club in '96 and the landscape of the league, and how it was emotion versus business, and how the game was drastically changing year in, year out over that period, is unbelievable to listen to. I honestly had goosebumps interviewing Neil. He was just incredible. So I was really thankful and appreciative that he took up the offer the second time. And again, just so welcoming and so humble, and he was brilliant. Clarko was difficult to get to, no doubt. Obviously, he's coaching the Hawthorn Football Club at the moment. So it took a little while to get to Clarko, but he accepted, and we spoke for a long time. And just so you guys know, just for the sake of context, even some of the things he said off the record about the Melbourne Football Club were just so heartwarming. He really enjoyed his time. He loved Neil Danaher. There's a really beautiful part in episode 4 about Neil Danaher and the job that he did, and how he turned the place on its head when he came in. And to hear Alistair Clarkson talk about Neil Danaher and the way he does, almost brings a tear to the eye, just knowing, the magnitude of Neil as a person and all the work that he's done with Fight MND. I just love it. That part of the story towards the end really fills you with a lot of joy as a Melbourne fan. So, Clarko was amazing, absolutely amazing. Honoured to obviously speak to the great man, and honoured to have him part of this series. Knowing that the reality is he's not even a club champion. He's a very good servant. Played those 2 years, was very reliable. Played every game in '95 and '96, and then goes on to be a fitness coach for a couple of years under Danaher. But in the grand scheme of things, he's a footnote in Melbourne's history. But for him to say the things that he said about the Melbourne Footy Club was really, really nice. But it was a bit of a struggle at times to get some people. I can say this on behalf of Sophie. She's the Demons cheer squad leader. She was a bit hesitant just because it still scars her, and I totally understand now, having gone through this process and put this doco together. But initially she didn't want to come on just because literally still makes her blood boil to this very day. But really nice again of her to jump on and give us her time. But all in all, it was a bit of a mixed bag. Yes, some people were pretty easy to get onto, but I don't know, we really had to pester in a healthy sense to get others on. So just glad that we persisted, Andy, and we got the relevant people on, and they've all told a brilliant story, and no one really comes out in a bad light. And look, if Dom wants to stand behind his comments, and he has on various occasions this week, even on his own podcast, then that's fine. And you got to back someone that's backing their own words, and each to their own. But everyone, even Ian Ridley and his position at the time of the Melbourne Football Club and the excerpts we took out of his book, I think most people come off looking pretty good. So it wasn't about dragging anyone through the mud. It was about telling a balanced, constructive and fair story, and I think that's what we've done.
Adrian, I found the first episode absolutely captivating, and I'd encourage any of the Demonland listeners who haven't chanced upon it yet to go and listen to it, particularly for the younger listeners, because it gives an excellent background into the AFL environment, or even the VFL environment at that particular time. But you said you were only 7 years of age at the time, so you weren't at the merger vote at Dallas Brooks Hall, but you said your father and grandfather were heavily influenced at that time. What have they told you about their memories at the time?
Yeah, so they were just devastated, like probably a lot of Melbourne supporters. And I think the thing that probably gets lost, and it's just a time thing, is that it was only a 2-month turnaround really between the Herald Sun breaking the story of the merger, and then all of a sudden you're at the Dallas Brooks Hall, not knowing whether this was the last time you could call them the Melbourne Football Club in their truest and original form. So I think that part of the story and that part of time is something that people probably forget about, because if you were to throw that situation up now and put it into today's context, that's remarkable. Like, for someone to turn around and say to you, let's say in 3 weeks' time, that a story would come out suggesting or saying that your club is talking to another club about the idea of merging, and the members are going to a vote in 6 to 8 weeks' time. Well, it just seems nonsensical. It seems illogical. You couldn't ever comprehend that could happen in this day and age. So for it to even just happen in general, and when it did back in '96, that was the thing that gobsmacked me, and that was the thing that really, I think, hurt my grandfather and my father at the time, that you're trying to wrap your brain around something that could be taken away from you so quickly. You don't have a lot of time for that potential to reality to seep into your brain. You know, particularly for my grandfather, like he passed away last year, and we were singing the Melbourne Demons theme song at his funeral, and everyone in the funeral hall was wearing Melbourne scarves, and I think every second story during his eulogy from his kids, including Dad, was about the Melbourne Football Club and just how much they meant to him. And he obviously had seen that incredible era of success when Norm Smith was there, and Ron Barassi is a champion player. And I think especially for him, just the very thought that the football club could get taken away from him so quickly was so alarming and so distressing. So I think that was the thing that really caught my attention when I was putting this together. And, it only takes 10 minutes to read up on it when I started to actually do my research and understand that the actual lead time between story breaking and the potential reality of the club merging with another team is so short. It's so short. So that definitely hurt him and took my grandfather by surprise. And for my old man, it was pretty simple. He just said to me, well, if there's no Melbourne Football Club, then I'm not going to support anyone. And I think there are a number of people who probably looked at it that way. And I think his hatred and jealousy of the Hawthorn Football Club and just watching them waltz to premiership after premiership probably epitomised the fact that it wasn't worth following footy, or it wasn't worth following a different entity if Melbourne weren't around. So, to hear those words and to understand that situation from my grandfather and my father, it's pretty gut-wrenching when you think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll put it out to the other boys. George, were you at Dallas Brooks Hall that night? I know I was there with our other co-host, Grapeviney, Jace, my cousin. We were there. I remember it being, very fiery. I wasn't aware that people couldn't get in. We got there pretty early and we got in, and it was very fiery. And I was like gobsmacked when I found out that that the club had voted against it. Obviously, we've got other information surrounding it now, but just the emotion there at the night and how many people were there with these no merger signs, and I couldn't even believe that the result panned out the way it did, considering all the people that were there. George, so were you there that night?
Yeah, I was certainly there that night, and like you, I got there early, which was fortunate, and got inside. The scenes were just dramatic, but my biggest memory was what was happening outside before the meeting even. I was a lot younger, of course, in those days. We all were. But I remember seeing numbers of what I thought at that time were old blokes, almost in tears and yelling and screaming at other people in support of the club and to push the no merger vote. And I'd never seen anything like this. You can imagine if the MCC members, for example, which I imagine a lot of these people were, and the sheer emotion that you never ever see in the MCC members area, but outside these people were rabid, absolutely rabid. So yeah, it was a very, very eye-opening night for me for all sorts of reasons.
Big man, were you present?
No, it wasn't actually, and it's funny that Adrian mentioned the short period between it being announced and the that vote happening. And I think I mentioned last week there's two types of Melbourne fans, and I'm in the denial camp in terms of managing the grief that the club's caused me over the years. But it worked well in that circumstance because I just didn't think it was possible. I just refused to accept that it was possible. So it didn't. I didn't go. I didn't think it was going to happen, and that was the approach I took to it. And fortunately, it didn't. And I think your point, Adrian's a really interesting one about the narrative afterwards being all about Melbourne voted for it, because I knew no one who barracked for Melbourne who wanted it. It wasn't even in the sort of discussion of anyone that I knew, and I've got lots of Melbourne friends who are fans of the D's. And so, yeah, I completely, I watched it on the news, but I was taking the view that, no, this is not going to be an issue. And I was saving myself a bit of grief, I think, with that.
The other thing is that the no merger game that Adrian mentioned as well. Big man, you were talking earlier, you don't think you were at the game. I was at the game. I went on the ground after Dunstall kicked his 100th goal. I had my no merger sign. I'm on the wing, and I've just looked up on YouTube. There is footage from the game, so I'm going to have a look later because I definitely remember getting on camera, so I might have to post that on Deebrief. But I remember, that we didn't have YouTube at the time, so I think I had a copy on VHS, but God knows where that is now. George, were you at that game?
Yes, I was there as well. Again, a very memorable and emotional night with all the fans in the stands, not only Andy, but spread throughout every stand with the no merger signs. I think it was security guards trying to remove some of them during the night. The other really telling things for me were I think David Neitz at one point had a chance to put us in front in the final quarter, and as he came in to kick, he managed to kick the ground before he kicked the ball and completely scrubbed it, which after Hawthorn having thrown us out of the final series just a few years before was very hard to take. It was our chance to sort of a bit of payback, but the final telling thing for me was the final siren, because, as Adrian said before, for his father and grandfather, sudden realisation that this could have been the last time that we'd actually watch our team play. So very emotional times for not only for the crowd, for me as well.
I used to have a whole lot of the no merger signs. So I'm pretty sure they were no merger on one side, and they were the demon jumper, the red V and the blue. I have no idea where they are, but they probably got lost in a move. But I'm sure they'd be worth something. Anyone seen them pop up on eBay?
I've got one.
Oh, you got one? Oh, great.
Yeah, no, I've got one. Mark Jenkins, who's in the series, co-founder of the Demon Alternative, he sent me a digital form on email, and I went down to one of the printing shops where our office used to be and asked the bloke if he could print the placard for me. And I don't know if you saw, but I took it to the Melbourne-Sydney game on that Friday night at the MCG last year. And, I went down to the race at the end because obviously it was a horrible year, and just to poke a little bit of fun and have a bit of a laugh, I held it aloft when the players were walking down the race, and the security guards took it off me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which is pretty funny. So I think one of the blokes who took it off me, and I don't know, don't quote me on this, but I think one of the blokes that took it off me was a pro-merger MCC steward, the way I interpreted it. He didn't lead on too much, but it was a bit of a farce, to be honest. And I don't know. I was a bit angry and emotional that night because obviously last year was diabolical for us after all the hope of 2018, and it was a bit of a circus. They took it off me, but I was probably being, I don't know, a little bit facetious myself. So yeah, that's just the emotions of a Melbourne supporter.
Well, good to see the security guard or whoever the steward is still holding a grudge.
Yeah. Well, that's the way that I've read this situation, and I spoke to Lloyd Toffon, who was with me. He's a panelist on the Deebrief podcast, and called him up the next day, and that's the way that we read the situation. So, yeah, incredible that even to this day, and Mark Jenkins said this, but some people in the MCC area don't talk to each other anymore. They just walk past each other. They used to be friends, and they, one party voted for the merger and one party voted against the merger, and you've got this this divide and broken friendships, and it still happens to this very day that people just ignore each other in the MCC, particularly that area. Mark was saying that there are blokes that he just won't speak to, just because they were vocal about backing a Hawthorn Demons or a Melbourne Hawks era, and voted for Melbourne to merge. And you know what? I don't begrudge him. I don't begrudge him at all. I probably wouldn't speak to anyone who wanted our club to merge, no matter what misery they put us through, like they did last night. We'll speak about that later, Andy. But they're our club, and we believe in them. And as much as it's frustrating, it wouldn't feel the same. We're all hopeful that we'll get to taste that ultimate success again, and what an incredible day it could be. But I think it's a little bit cowardly in some respects if you want to see your club become a merged, diluted entity. So for Mark and his take on it and how he refuses to speak to people that voted for the merger, I don't begrudge him one bit for not wanting to engage with those people at all.
Adrian, just on the no merger sign from last year, you mentioned Ian Ridley's book, and I was interested to hear, listening to the podcast earlier tonight, that for him the driver was the fear of not having a footy club. That was seemed to be the sort of the heart of his support for a merger, but that the issues that were causing us to have that issue, to the club to be at threat, was not having our own ground, not having our own social club, no decent training facilities, membership numbers, completely down the bottom of the table. Given those things all remain pretty significant issues for the club, do you fear for our future going forward?
I don't think I do. I think Melbourne have done a really good job in the last 6 to 7 years of engineering a bit of stability in the club. I think they're absolutely desperate, as we know, to get a permanent training facility at a state-of-the-art facility, or to create a facility. And obviously the council have knocked us back with that piece of land next to the MCG, and it continues to be a problem for us. And we've floated the idea of having that little bit of piece of land out the back of Gosh's paddock. And I think the club is doing everything they can. And I think I do question Gary Pert's credentials, just purely off the fact that if you look at his track record and what he's done at Clubland and what he did with Collingwood, and just his career in general, I don't think it's too inspiring when you weigh it up against the PJs of this world and the work that he did, and he came in and cleaned up a mess. So, yeah, I certainly have my concerns around Pert and some of the administrators, but I think the work that's been done by the Peter Jackson administration and everything under his tutelage suggests that at least there's perhaps a mandate in place around that being one of the primary focuses for us. I think that'll make a massive difference when it happens. I do believe it will happen at some point in the next, let's say, 3 to 7 years. And when it does, I think you'll see a bit of an upturn in the way that the club is run and streamlined. I don't think it helps any club sharing facilities with, 4 or 5 other professional clubs from different sporting codes. It's a bit of a farce down there at Amy Park. But from a financial point of view, we've cleaned up a lot of debts. We've done a good job on that end. Recruitment and drafting wise, I'm going to sound hypocritical here, but yes, our skills have been deplorable and we look like one of the worst kicking teams in the league. But I think with a few adjustments in the coaching department, Melbourne can get themselves on the right track again. I think they sucked me in last week thinking they were on the right track, but you're not on the right track when you turn in performances like last night. So from a holistic perspective, looking at the club, I'm okay. I'm pretty hopeful that we're moving in the right direction. I think there's a pretty decent buy-in and genuine love for the club from the members and supporters point of view at the moment. And I the one thing that I really love about the supporter base at the moment is they're desperate. They're probably, and I don't know if this has anything to do with social media, and I don't want to come off sounding disrespectful because I know how much you blokes love the club and you've been around a bit longer than me and had to endure more hardship than I have. And that, in my mind, it's the whole, respect your elders thing when it comes to the Melbourne Football Club. I've got the utmost respect for people in their 50s and 60s and 70s that have had to see the crap and put up with the terrible decisions that we've seen over the journey. But I don't know. I just feel, and maybe I'm a bit too close to it because I'm running this, this podcast and these social channels on behalf of the Demons, as an independent. But I just feel like people have had enough. And I feel like the genuine desire amongst supporters and the nature of them at the moment, to me, suggests that they're not going anywhere. As much as it kills them to watch what happened last night and to know that maybe another finals campaign will pass us by and we won't have a tilted a flag again this year, and maybe it looks a little bit far off at the moment again, but I don't feel like any of the supporters are going anywhere. I feel like the supporters are firmly buying in. They believe in the list. I believe in the list myself. But I think from a football department perspective, we need to make a few changes to ensure that we don't waste the talent that we see on the list at the moment. It would be absolutely devastating to look back in 5 years and know that we didn't capitalise on Max Gawn and one of the greatest ruckmen that we've seen at the footy club since Jim, and it'd be terrible to know that we didn't capitalise on the insane talents of a Christian Petrarca, a Clayton Oliver, a Jack Viney, etc., etc., etc. So I still think we're in a really firm, good position, but I think the club probably needs to act quick from a football department point of view and get a few things in place that can steer us in the right direction again. So I'm remaining buoyant and optimistic.
That's what I like to hear. Hopefully Andy is as well. It's interesting, just at the end of the first episode, so I'm looking forward to the second one. It gives a bit of a lead into the second episode with discussion of what Hawthorn's motivations or drivers for the merger were. And it's interesting to be reminded that they were in struggle town as well in terms of their membership and all of the sorts of things we're experiencing, despite the fact that they won, I think he said 9 grand finals by that point, which since 64, obviously we haven't won one. They've gone on to be able to get their own, they've got their membership. At one point they had the highest amount of members at VFL Park. Obviously they're going to move across to their own grounds in, where is it, in Dunkley, and do another training facility. They've got money. Why do you think they've been able to do that, whereas we haven't been able to take that step?
There's a lot of facets to it. I think one thing that I've realised when you get a little bit older and you understand business a little bit more is just how important the role of the president, the chairman, the CEO is. I don't think the coach is the most important person at a football club. I think the average punter out there in the footy world at the moment and all the media that we see that's essentially just centred around the players and the coaching and the coach, or the head coach rather, or the assistants, may suggest otherwise. But I don't know. I'd almost put the coach at probably the fourth or fifth most important person in the club. I think it's really top down. It's the CEO, it's the president, it's the general, footy manager. I'll put it out there. I'm pretty blunt about this. I don't think Josh Marnie stacks up. I think he's had too long at the footy club. I think we need a fresh set of eyes. I think he's been around too long. I've got on good authority that he's not really much of a hard ass. He's too bum chum with some of the players. I know that doesn't sit well with me. I think there needs to be a clear line drawn between the players and the administrators, and I think the administrators and the people in those higher positions of authority, I think they really, they're there to generate the culture and the identity and the commercial side of the business, obviously. But I think they play an integral role, and I think you look at Richmond and what they were able to do and how they turned it around so quickly. And I think Brendan Gale just commands respect. I think Peggy O'Neill as well. I learned a lot about her over the journey from a few family friends of mine that have strong ties to the Richmond Football Club. Apparently she is just an absolute breath of fresh air, and similar thing, just commands respect and understands the inner workings of a well-oiled machine. I think some people might look at the Western Bulldogs and say, well, it was a fluke. Well, not when you start actually digging beneath the surface and learning about some of the other administrators behind the scenes and some of the work that they did to set up the cultural habits that the club has now. And I think Luke Beveridge was a masterstroke in that perspective. I think he complemented that administration and that team really well. And I just think through just poor decision making from an administration point of view, and obviously a coaching point of view, like we can hark on about Mark Neild and Dean Bailey. I actually think Dean Bailey was as bad as he was, but he just inherited a shocking team at that point in time where, Neil Danaher didn't get the respect he deserved, and we didn't do a great job at looking long-term and 3-4 years down the track and treated our senior players with, utter contempt. It was an absolute disgrace. So there are a lot of different decisions that we've made over the journey that have meant that we've put ourselves into vulnerable and unfortunate positions. But you take one look at some of the most successful clubs and you look at those more senior authoritative figures who understand how to run a business, because that's what it is at the end of the day. And the proof's in the pudding. You get those strong, ruthless, honest people in those positions, and that's where it stems from me. So bit of a shake-up for Melbourne in some areas, and it can change very, very quickly. And that's why I always remain optimistic, and we've seen it. We're seeing it at the moment with Brisbane. Brisbane a great story of the competition. St Kilda as well. Again, turning it around very quickly. A team that's been struggling for the best part of 8-9 years since the post Hayes, Milne, Gehrig revolt era as they slowly left the club. And that's why I think with our talent in our list and just a couple of structural changes from an administration and footy department point of view, don't give up on this list. I really don't give up on this list, and let's not waste what we've got in front of us. I think it can change very quickly, and we've seen that. With a little bit of luck and the right decisions, we can start to get close to what we all hope will be that drought-breaking flag.
Hypothetical question time, extremely hypothetical question time. Both clubs took a completely different path after the whole merger episode. Hawks have obviously had that success. Do you think again, very, very hypothetical, that the merged club would have had that success that the Hawks enjoyed, or would we have just Melbourneised the whole thing? George, I'll ask you first.
It's an interesting concept. What would be the MFC HSS by now? Would it? I don't think we would have seen the same level of success over that period. Melbourne enjoyed some success around the 2000 year, but you'll remember that Hawthorn at that point were at the bottom of the ladder.
Yep.
Hawthorn didn't get another premiership until 2008.
Yeah, it's a long time.
And it's a long time, and that 2008 premiership was based on the excellent drafting opportunities of the Franklin, Roughhead, Lewis. And they had a couple of successive drafts in there where they really were lucky and good to get those people. It would have been interesting, particularly given the comments that Adrian made before about how many people would have actually stuck with a merged group, given the attitude of, like his father said, if Melbourne wasn't around, there's no use barracking for someone else. So it would have been an interesting scenario as to whether we would have kept the people, and as a result, the financial benefits, would they have flowed through?
Well,
good question.
I'll ask that question now. Actually, I was going to ask it later, but I've heard a lot of people say over the years that they wouldn't have followed the merged club, or they wouldn't have even followed another club, or they wouldn't have followed footy at all. What about you guys? Would you have followed the Dorks? Big man, I might start with you.
It's funny you should ask, because I'm with Adrian's dad. I remember, like I said at the time, I just refused to accept that it was going to happen. I just was in complete denial. But I do really clearly remember thinking and telling anyone who would listen that there's no way I'm barracking for anyone but Melbourne. And I don't know how I would have gone even with footy after that. I've got a really good mate who was a massive Fitzroy fan, and he was shattered when the Lions ceased to exist, really. And he actually, after a couple of years, started barracking for Melbourne, and he was a huge Melbourne fan. And I was amazed at his sort of passion that he brought to the club. And then a few years after Brisbane became the Brisbane Lions, he eventually left, in fact, just in time for their first flag. But I just couldn't see myself being interested in football, let alone being interested in the Dorks.
Before I go to Adrian, George, would you have been a member of Hawkland.com?
Well, that just sits badly at the moment. Those very words. Look, it's difficult because it didn't happen to us. I don't know that I would have been as passionate about it, but I worked with a lot of people who barracked for South Melbourne and Fitzroy. And saw them, in some cases, completely leave the support of the game, and in other cases switch their allegiances, but they were never passionate in the same way about the Brisbane Lions or Sydney. They barracked for them nominally, but that was about the limit of it. I think I probably would have been the same.
And Adrian, you were young at the time, but do you remember your feelings at the time, or at least even if you're going to follow your old man, what you said he wasn't going to do it, would you have followed suit, or what would have happened with you?
Well, I would have been disappointed because I wouldn't have been able to watch Jeff Farmer kick 9 goals in a second half. So I would have missed out on one of the great half performances of a small forward of all time. So I don't know. I really don't know, to be honest. It's a hard one to answer. I think given my love and my enthusiasm for footy, I may have followed another club. I know a very close friend of mine, his old man was as passionate as they come as a Fitzroy supporter, and his old man took a few years out of the game and didn't want to support anyone, and then eventually ended up taking up Essendon as his new team. And so my close friend is a massive, passionate Essendon fan. But funnily enough, he said give Essendon away in an instant if it meant that he could follow Fitzroy if they were still in entity in the league. And I think that kind of rings true for me that, yeah, if I was supporting a different club, and who knows what club it would be, yeah, I don't know. I think it just wouldn't feel right. And maybe I wouldn't be as passionate as I was or am about the game now. So, yeah, it's an eerie one and it's a weird one. Would we have Melbournised the situation between the merged entity? Yeah, probably, of course. But I think given the list demographic of Melbourne at the time, obviously we saw the great year of '98 under Danaher, going from bottom to fourth in a prelim, and obviously making the grand final in 2000. And you look at Hawthorn's playing list as well, and some of the stars that they had coming through, like Holland and Crawford in particular. I think the Melbournised Dorks would have at least, I think we would have at least seen a flag. So, yeah. But, yeah, it kills me that Hawthorn have gone on and won 4, and we haven't obviously won 1. But, yeah, I think in there somewhere, given the list demographic and the talent, I think if we were all to support the merged entity, we would have enjoyed a flag. But would have it felt hollow? That's my question back to you guys.
It's an interesting one. Like, I remember, I think I was having a think about it when I spoke to you the other day, Adrian, because at the time when I was speaking to you the other day, I couldn't remember what my thoughts were, and I then remembered something. I think I would have barracked for them. And in time, you would just take it on. It's your team. I was under whenever I saw Don Scott rip off the hawk off the jumper, I was always hoping, well, that's what's eventually going to happen, that we're going to just rip that the Hawthorn on and we'll just have the same jumper, but we'll be called the Hawks and big deal. So, yeah, look, I can't look. We don't know. It didn't happen, so I can't. It probably wouldn't have been hollow because once I'd started barracking for them and going to games, and I would have got over it, I think. It would have hurt, but I would have got over it. And if they were successful, I think I would have taken it on board. But,
Andy, wearing the brown and gold.
No. It was red and blue with a touch of yellow.
Oh, my Lord. I mean, from the royal blue, and, that's just, I can't even.
Yeah.
Not even an alternate reality sliding doors. It just gives me shivers.
It does. Would it be, man? Would it be? I don't know. So I guess it's hollow. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, hollow.
Go ahead, George.
Yeah, the colours would have done it, and the Hawthorn supporters having to sit alongside them. They're obnoxious at the best of times. So.
I'm a sucker for an alternative Guernsey, so I don't know.
Seriously, no, it would have been weird. Would have been very weird, very hollow. But yeah, I was probably too young. I'm in some respects, I might have been a pretty passionate Dorks fan because I was only 7, so I mightn't have known any better and could have just taken them in my stride. That makes me even more sick because I have a pretty deep hatred of Hawthorn from a personal perspective. But anyway, I'm just glad it didn't happen because as much as they crush our souls, I think we all believe that our day will come at some point in time, and we're all just hanging out for it. So yeah, we might be fools. We probably are fools, but I don't know. Better to be a fool with that hope than not be in it at all, in my opinion.
Adrian, back to the merger. Do you think the angst caused by the emotions around the proposed merger, do you think that changed the thinking at AFL headquarters about further mergers?
Yeah, I think it definitely did. I'm not going to speak for Ross Oakley, but I could tell in the way that he was framing the conversation and the discussion that we had that in some respects they probably did underestimate emotion and footy supporters' attachment to their football clubs when they were making their decisions. And clearly they went in with the mandate that you're coming in, Ross, to do a pretty ruthless pretty, I wouldn't say unsavoury, but he would have. I guess he would have taken the role knowing that he was going to be painted as a bit of a villain, and it came with the territory. So, I think definitely Ross Oakley and the AFL probably looked at it post '96 and the fallout, and even just that night, Dallas Brooks Hall and Camberwell Civic Centre. It gives me goosebumps and shivers just going back through the audio and listening to Don Scott and Ian Ridley and Brian Dixon and Brian Coleman, the Hawthorn president. And I think the toxicity and the viciousness of those two nights probably sent a bit of an alarm bell ringing in the minds of the AFL administration, the commission at the time, that we probably shouldn't tread down this path again. We should probably avoided it at all costs because it was an ugly exercise. So I think it definitely put them off, no doubt. It's a great question, actually, because I was asking myself the same question. You look at it and merger talks and relocations really stop in their tracks when you think about it after '96. And I think the Melbourne and Hawthorn saga was certainly one of the reasons why. But I don't think they're off the table per se. I actually look at North Melbourne, and again, I don't want to be disrespectful to North Melbourne. Like, I don't really think anything of North Melbourne, and I hate to use the words irrelevant, but I don't know. They don't bother me, and they just kind of go about their business quietly, I guess. But North Melbourne still in my mind, and if you look at this COVID situation in the AFL now, well, it actually doesn't. It actually isn't the worst theory in the world to suggest that maybe North Melbourne would be better off going down to Tasmania and relocating and setting up a team down there, knowing that their financial situation is extremely dire and it's not going to be helped by this virus. So I don't think mergers are done. I don't think I'd probably just call them relocations, but I don't think they're done. And I think anyone to suggest that they are is a little bit foolish, given the fact that the AFL's TV deal has been exposed significantly to the average punter this year, and just how important that TV revenue is when you've got the AFL spending $4 million on hubs each week up in Queensland just to ensure that they can get games on free-to-air telly and on Fox Footy, just so they can run advertising through those networks. So I don't think they're done at all. And I think there's a couple of clubs that are vulnerable, and I think that the two clubs clearly are North Melbourne and the Gold Coast. But I think North Melbourne are probably top of the list. So as much as, Melbourne and Hawthorn probably stopped in its tracks for quite some time, I still think there's potential for it to happen in the future. I really do.
It's interesting, Adrian, you mentioned the COVID situation and the I guess not dire, but pretty significant financial issue that the AFL is in at the moment. It was fascinating to hear Ross Oakley talk about how close the AFL was to, or VFL, to not being solvent. It sort of seems remarkable given how much of a financial behemoth the AFL is now. But just in terms of Melbourne Footy Club, what do you think the legacy is of the failed merger for us? If there is a legacy.
Well, the legacy is probably not good. And the legacy that most people think of, and even I think the majority of Melbourne fans talk about it in this way, that thank God Hawthorn voted against it. It comes back to that original point I was making. That's not right. I'm sorry, but the vote ends up being 52.5% to 47.5%, and the validity of the vote is still in question. There's talk of random proxy votes coming out of nowhere. There's talk of, you guys were there, like clearly there were hundreds, if not thousands of people locked out of that hall. Like that's not a legal voting process. I don't care what anyone says, but the reality is they closed the doors. It's documented in Ian Ridley's book. It's documented by the people that were there. A couple of you were actually there in the flesh. You understood that situation yourselves. Joe Goodnick and the Demon Alternative prepare to go down to the Supreme Court to challenge the verdict. And even Ian Ridley himself says that, well, the very slender minority that voted for the merger didn't sit well with him, even though he was content with the fact that the result had got up. He was also, pretty disappointed and distressed that it wasn't, let's say, a 65-35 split instead of a 52.5 versus 47.5. So I think the legacy needs to be changed. I think if you look at the general thoughts of some of the people that are interviewed in this series at the time, and the situation around Ian Ridley and the courts and the dubious nature of the vote, then I'm really hopeful that the legacy of the merger changes so that people actually start to look at it from a different perspective and start to think that, well, the Demon Alternative and the Melbourne supporters actually really care about their football club, and they did everything in their power to ensure that the football club retained its true identity. And there were a lot of different forces that didn't work in the anti-merger group's favour. Like Hawthorn's anti-merger group, Operation Payback, were given kind of free rein. They were given access to club facilities, to the social club. They were given access to other amenities and infrastructure at Hawthorn, and the Hawthorn board essentially allowed them to give it a crack and see if they could get it over the line and raise the amount of money that they needed to save the club. Whereas you listen to the series, you listen to Mark Jenkins, you listen to Sophie Gaylor, the cheer squad and the Demon Alternative were given nothing. They were seen as absolute antagonists and detractors. And Ian Ridley, again, absolutely respect what he did for our football club, but they didn't take them seriously. They thought they were pests. They didn't help them in any way, shape, or form. It's a completely different story on the Hawthorn side of things. So the legacy is not good right now. The legacy for me is horrible, and there was a driving motivation for me to put this together to show people that no, the Demon Alternative, the Demon Army, the Cheer Squad, and a number of Melbourne people, they worked their asses off during that turbulent 2 to 3 month period to try and save this football club. And I hope one day that the Melbourne Football Club revisit this piece of history and maybe expunge the vote verdict out of the history books of the Melbourne Football Club. Because I'm sorry, but the validity of the vote it's not right. And it was going to be challenged. And you'll learn about why it didn't get challenged, and it's pretty obvious why. You can read between the lines, seeing what happened with Mr. Goodnick in the year following. But I just hope the legacy is completely different, and people understand that there is a significant number of people that do truly care about this football club and did their utmost to try and preserve their identity. Not good now, but after people listen to this, hopefully our supporters can view that piece of history differently. And if the Melbourne Football Club want to talk to me about it and they want to do something about changing that part of their history and writing something on their website, and I don't know, keeping something there and archiving something, then as a passionate Melbourne supporter, I don't know, I just think that would be a tremendous thing to come out of doing this documentary.
And you mentioned Diamond Joe Goodnick. He was a pretty divisive figure at the Melbourne Footy Club. Do you have a sort of view about his place in the history of that period in the club?
Yeah, I do. And I said to you guys before that I don't think anyone comes out of this in a bad light. But I think the only person that probably does a little bit is Joe. Look, respect Joe for coming in at the 11th hour and doing what he did and putting his hand up and, obviously dipping into his pocket and trying to preserve Melbourne's history and their identity. But again, I won't reveal it now. You'll hear it yourselves. But I think Joe's business interests certainly outweighed his love for the footy club. Hasser Man and Anne Ridley had never heard of Joe Goodnick before. Brian Dixon plays his trump card, and all of a sudden, this Orthodox Jewish rabbi is the front man for the anti-merger group. So, yeah, I think Joe, for me, I wouldn't call him a passionate Melbourne supporter. I wouldn't call him someone that probably truly cared about the best intentions of the footy club, even though he probably displayed himself in that way. And that's something for you guys to listen to and understand, and for all Melbourne supporters to get across once you listen to the 3rd and 4th episode of this series. And I'm a little bit disappointed because I don't know, initially when I think about Joe Goodnick, I'm like, oh, what an amazing man. He put all his, he tried to help save the Melbourne Football Club, put his hard-earned into it, and was willing to back the club during a tumultuous period. But, yeah, I dug beneath the surface a bit more and, a bit disappointed. Probably the one person out of this whole exercise that, probably doesn't come out of it too well. And also the fact that we couldn't get onto him annoyed me as well. Because I would have loved to have spoken
last
to
one
him.
from
But,
me. You mentioned
he's on the run a bit, I believe. He's got a few problems at the moment.
Do you think it's real?
Oh, hold on a sec, big man. Adrian was just finishing his thought.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, that's all right.
All right, go ahead, big man. Ask away.
Just asking, I didn't hear the last bit. You mentioned in the podcast the Norm Smith curse, of course. So just wondering if you think it's real.
On last night's evidence, it's obviously real. So I'll just leave you with that, short and sharp, because I like to ramble on. But yeah, of course it's true.
Well, finally, we'll wrap this part of the show up. What's next for you, Adrian? Do you have any plans for another series of podcasts tackling issues such as this one, perhaps the tanking saga? And I know you mentioned your Essendon mate. I know you got a mate that does a podcast. Is that an Essendon podcast?
Yeah, so it's very funny that you threw that up, actually. So Rob Crawford, who's my business partner, so we run Podular Media together, and we've done podcasting together for, the best part of 4 years now, I think. And we used to do a soccer podcast called Daily Football Show, and we went to Russia and did a show on the road every day and did podcasts with journos over there, and it was unbelievable. Such an incredible experience because I'm a very passionate soccer man as well as an Aussie Rules supporter, and he's a big Essendon fan, absolutely loves him, and he runs the Sash podcast. So as much as that pains me to give him a plug, because I loathe Essendon, they're easily my most hated team in the league, that's for sure. I guess that helps when your in-laws go for Essendon. He runs a Sash, and I've been telling him that we're going to do the saga.
That's the peptides. That's what I was going to ask you in relation to that. Is there any of that on the horizon?
Oh, look, we do joke about it a little bit. We spoke about it I think we even spoke about it this week. We want to do that story at some point in time, if we actually can. I'm sure there's other I'm sure there's other documentary companies out there that are, certainly bigger and more credentialed than ours that are probably looking into it themselves. So it'd be incredible to do that story. Whether you get the access and the permission to speak to the people is a completely different story. But we are working on some other content. I can't reveal too much, but we are actually speaking to another AFL club. It's not Melbourne, it's not Essendon, so it's one of the other 16 clubs, about doing a documentary on their history which is really exciting to work officially with an AFL club. And then there's a few other codes as well. We're looking into a Matildas documentary, one of the great national sporting sides at the moment. They're unbelievable, those girls, and what they've achieved over the last 5 to 6 years. And we're looking at pitching the FFA about doing a documentary about the Matildas and the upcoming World Cup here in Australia. If you're not a soccer fan, whatever, but I actually encourage you. They are phenomenal. They are so talented. They're one of the best teams in the world. They're ranked inside the top 10. Sam Kerr's one of the best footballers currently in the world as well. And there's a number of different Matildas players playing for some of the biggest clubs in England. Really exciting. Hopefully we can win that piece of work. So we're pitching in at the moment to see if we can get that doco. It's all coming together, but I thought the best place to start by entering into this audio documentary world was with my beloved Melbourne Football Club, and hopefully I can debunk a few myths along the way.
So is this all audio stuff, or you got to get into the visual aspect? And was there any thoughts of doing some video documentary about this merger thing at any stage?
Well, video, like film and video is an area that I definitely want to get into at some point. I think the problem, Andy, is if you look at it from a business perspective, there are so many world-class film production companies out there at the moment. It's extremely competitive. Like anything in most industries, it's so hard to differentiate yourself. It's so hard to be unique and different. And I think the audio documentary realm is a bit of a niche at the moment, and that's why we're tackling it. It's a very strategic move from us as a company. I kind of hate talking about this stuff. I hate pumping up my tyres, so I'll move on quickly.
You're welcome to.
Yeah, but that's why we're doing it. That's why we're in this space at the moment, because from an investor / monetization point of view, if we were, playing in the video film realm, then our ability to raise capital, our ability to make our company viable would be severely limited, just because it's such a competitive market, whereas the audio component is quite untapped, and that's why we're trying to become those early market adopters at the moment in this space. But video for me and film and documentaries, I love them. I've always been a massive, massive documentary fan. I've watched everything from Louis Theroux, Ross Kemp, through to all the incredible docos that you see at the moment on Netflix. And yeah, my wife and I are obsessed with crime documentaries and constantly watching them. And my end goal is to one day produce or be involved in a film documentary at some point in time. And I guess I see the audio component as a bit of a stepping stone. So yeah, that's where my head's at from a business perspective.
Fantastic. Well, we've been putting off discussing last night's game, I think, for long enough, and maybe we'll get straight into that. Adrian's going to stay with us if you so want. Guys, we've seen numerous times this year. I'm going to talk about our basic skill errors first. I've seen it numerous times. Last night was not AFL level. It was not even VFL standard. No disrespect to VFL players. The repeatedly missing targets from 20 metres away, hospital or bullet handballs to someone's feet, for God's sakes. Oftentimes to a player that's under more pressure than the one who just had the ball. It's so much fumbling. For the stat lovers, we were at 66 disposal efficiency, which I was actually shocked to see it was that high, to 78% for Port. George, certainly not something that we like to see.
Yeah, I watched there was a video on the AFL side about the errors of Melbourne during the game, and it wasn't enjoyable watching whatsoever. It was appalling right from the start. It didn't get any better. When I think Richardson was interviewed at 3/4 time, and he was saying we're just going to have to knuckle down and try and get some pride and respect out of this. And quite frankly, nothing changed even in that last quarter as well. It was just awful across the board. The big question, I suppose, that we might try and work out tonight is why.
Well, Adrian, I actually listened to the Debrief podcast when I was walking my dogs just this afternoon, and I noticed that you had a very good discussion in terms of the kicking and how many good kicks we have in our team. And I thought you guys were actually a bit generous with some of the ones you labelled as good kicks. It starts off there, I think, in terms of the skills. We just don't have enough elite kickers, let alone good kickers.
Yeah, well, I apologise for our cursing and our swearing. We were obviously incredibly upset this morning, even when we woke up. I'm a firm believer that sleep cures all, and didn't, because I was in a red hot stink when I woke up, and just so disappointed with the output from the players last night. And the kicking was dreadful. You said it wasn't even VFL standard. It wasn't even Pecola League standard where I'm from. It was appalling. And I think the other thing that really annoyed me, and I probably didn't bring it up on the podcast this morning because we got a bit swept up in rating the players, or every player on the list, and whether they're an above average kick or not. It got a little bit comical. It was pretty funny at times. And I guess that's what I like about doing a podcast with other Melbourne Tragics, is you can walk away from it and feel a little bit better about yourself. It sounds ridiculous, but you do.
That's why I do this every week.
Yeah, exactly. It's cathartic. It's therapeutic. So the thing that I found really baffling last night was Melbourne at stoppages last night, which is meant to be our bread and butter under Simon Goodwin, the brand that he always talks about, is the separation between midfielders. So I remember being taught at a very young age when I was playing footy that when you set up at a stoppage, you got your ruckman, of course, so we'll eliminate the ruckman out of the conversation. But when you got your other midfielders around, the idea is that you need to have a certain amount of separation from the ball. So when the ball hits the ruckman and then goes to the deck, that one person will go in, and then the other one will sit off a little bit, and then there'll be someone on the outside or front and centre. And I saw it a lot last night, where if Melbourne took first possession of the ball from stoppages, there was 2 or 3 players that were probably half a metre or a metre at max where the player was who had the ball in hand. That does you no favours. The idea of being able to get out of a congested situation is by positioning yourself whereby you're 2, 3, 4 metres away from that particular player that's got ball in hand. So then you can obviously release with a handball and then link up and try and beat a press or a zone or whatever. And Melbourne, for some reason, and I don't know about you guys, but I think they, unfortunately, and I think it's so unnecessary, I think they just find themselves in contested situations where they don't have to be. I find like Melbourne in their forward half seem to be attracted to the ball like bees to a honeypot. They normally kick to 2v2s, 3v3s. They normally kick to packs, and then it's a ground ball situation. And at the stoppages, it just happened consistently where Melbourne players were doing these dinky little half-metre / 1 metre handballs to each other to try and get out of congestion. And it's so easy to pick off if you're an opposition player, because all you need to do is just sit on your man. Sit on your man, put a block on, put a tackle on, and you can control that situation. So I think there's a lot to be learnt for Melbourne moving forward about how they actually set up positionally, especially the way that some of the forwards are leading at the moment. They continue to lead into each other with their leading patterns. But even just from contested situations, just a little bit more separation, give yourself the opportunity to release from a handball, or at least link up and then release from a handball sequence. It was mind-boggling at times watching how pathetic the stoppage work was last night. And that's what really hurt me the most, because, as I said, that's meant to be one of the cornerstones of our game.
We had one good chain of link-up handballs, one in the whole game, and that was resulted in that goal to Wiedemann in the goal square where he just ran it in. That was it. There was no other good linking at any stage, and most of those were actually handballs right up until Milksham kicked it long to Wiedemann. It's just not good enough. Bin Man, basic skill errors. How did you see all that, and particularly what Adrian has talked about?
Well, Adrian mentioned that he's been a long-term reader of Demonland, and not a poster though, Adrian. Maybe a lurker, maybe he's a secret avatar.
In Adrian's defence, the majority of people that use Demonland are actually just readers and lurkers. I know that for a fact because I see the stats of it. But we won't hold that against anyone.
We won't hold that against him. But if you've read any of my posts about kicking over the last long time, actually, ever since I've been posting on Demonland, which is a fair while now. I think it's been our biggest issue for a decade. Continues to be an issue. Yeah. I didn't hear debrief this morning, but I'd be arguing pretty strongly that, in fact, we've got the least number of above average AFL kicks in the league. And
you want to name, not shame, just name who are our good kicks.
Well, I think we've only got. I'd argue almost now only one, Benel, and Salem.
Well, he was
Salem more for me. He can't kick 50
It was terrible last night.
50 metres. People will bag me for it, and maybe it's my confirmation bias, but I think Oscar McDonald is a good kick, but perhaps only Benel is elite kick at the, when you talk elite, but you only need 3 or 4 elites. You need 8, 9, 10 above average, and the rest average, and you can't carry more than 2 or 3 below average, and we've literally got half a dozen easily below average more. And I think for me the biggest thing for the game is that, and we'll get to it, I guess, but was we were clearly fatigued, and I'm really quite frustrated with a few things with that. But for me, in any sport, the biggest impact of on technique, or the biggest thing that exposes poor technique, is pressure and fatigue. They're the two things in any sport that exposes poor technique. And I don't think, in fact, it was a very high pressure game at all in that first quarter. They didn't put much pressure on us. It was a pretty free-flowing game. And it's the fatigue just exposed how poor the technique was. And people talk about the Oliver kick. That kick from Oliver at the beginning of the game that coughed up that first goal was just a pure lazy fatigue, exposed his ball drop. Same with Track with his ball drop. I think that it just completely exposed our poor technique, just like high pressure games do as well. And it continues to be a massive issue, and it goes back to the decision making about who they've recruited in the last few years. And as again, if you probably the Watts wars, but I still think it was crazy as a club. I don't care what the off-field stuff was necessarily, but you don't get rid of your best kick, one of the best kicks in the league, when you've got no one coming up behind him.
Andy, I think Adrian's point is very relevant about the contested situation, and I think Port basically watched what Brisbane did to us, particularly since we've got such a dominant ruckman, in that Port were prepared to stand behind our mids and people in the contested situation. That meant that if we get the ball, you're immediately going to be tackled and you're under pressure. And we didn't change anything. As Adrian said, you've just got to get distance between you and your man. You don't have three players in at the ball all the time. And we fell into that trap in Brisbane. They used exactly the same tactics, and nothing changed in this game, which was really disappointing for me.
That's an indictment on the football department, the coaches, because every team is going to do that to us now. And if we don't do anything about it, which we obviously didn't from last week, and that was a glaring thing from last week, and we didn't do anything about it this week, well, what happens next week? Adelaide are going to do that to us, and we're going to give them their first win. This has to change.
It was made much worse this week because how many fumbles we had and how many times we had the ball, in the hands and they slipped out. I lost count of how many times Harms fumbled the ball. Hannon as well. Like those sort of tiny little handballs are, as Adrian points out and George as well, aren't helpful to clear the space. But, you doubly have a problem when you handball to someone right next to you who drops the ball and turns it over because of that. So, they were just sort of not on at all, were they?
This brings us forward 50 entries. It's becoming comical. Repeatedly kicking to the boundary line. Not learning from last week, that wide kick to Fritsch. Still, we're bombing it into packs or to one-on-ones where we've got a player that's significantly outside, or even worse yet, we kick it directly to an opposition player. If we could pinpoint pass to our forwards the way we do to our opposition, we'd be unstoppable. There were so many times we just hit up an opposition player with not a Melbourne player anywhere near it, and it can't happen. This is ridiculous.
I watched a bit of the Hawthorn game this afternoon, and it was great that a Melbourne player was ferocious out of the back line, running in lines, taking dangerous kicks into the corridor, crossing to the fat side. But then I realised Frost doesn't play for us anymore. And, it was unbelievable. The quarter I watched, he was awesome.
Go ahead, George.
Yeah, it's not just the forward entries are the problem. I'm more concerned about the forward exits, forward 50 exits.
Don't worry, that's coming up next.
Is it? All right, I'll save myself up for that. But yeah, you're right. There's no consistency. And again, it's a pity we're just watching television. You can't actually see what's going on. But I recall time and time again, there was one player in the forward 50 who was attempting to be the leading target. Where were the other forwards? I saw Tom McDonald down the back line at one stage, Fritsch down the back line at one stage. I just couldn't work out what was going on, who was meant to be playing up there. So, yeah, it's again a recurring theme, isn't it?
The other thing about the kicking, though, and it's a huge frustration, I think I mentioned it last week, is that kick down the line to Gawn that has become a bit of a pattern. That's made worse by the fact they don't seem to be looking at all across the ground for the switch. And as I mentioned last week, Lever often doesn't even look. And I think part of that is just a lack of confidence to be able to hit a target 40 metres away, even if they're standing by themselves. And I'm not being facetious. I just think we have players who don't feel confident to be able to make that kick, so don't look for it. And they just camped on us putting it down that line. It was, at one point, Gawn in the last quarter, I think, tried to kick to the sort of the corridor, and of course it got picked off. They just sweated on it and turned it back over and, kicked another goal.
There's a lot of indecision and a lot of hesitancy, and I think that causes a lot of the turnovers as well. And not for the first time, we had another goalless quarter under Goodwin whilst having ample inside 50s. I've got to talk about these turnovers. Early in the match, I don't know if you were watching it, you would have heard this. Early in the match, we had 21 possessions and 12 of them had resulted in turnovers. That's more than half of our disposals resulting in turnovers. And I don't have the stats on this, but they punished us a lot because of the turnovers. If you turn it over and you're out of position, you all of a sudden you're out of position, and they would just run in waves, and they just did as they pleased on the rebound. It's got to stop. Yeah.
It was even worse than that, Andy. I heard a stat after the match that Port scored 8 goals from turnovers inside our forward 50.
Oh, well, there you go. That's it. That's the one I was looking for.
Yeah.
And just part of that was the turnover in footy now, the turnover at the opposition's half-back line, in the corridor. We turned it over about 5 times directly there. Track did one at one point, which was a horror, where the opposition get it there. They're in the corridor. Our team's all out of position because we're pushing forward, banking that we're going to get the ball, and we got caught out the back at least 5 times because of that. You just can't turn the footy over in that spot.
Adrian, you have anything to add on our turnovers? I'm sure it makes your blood boil.
It's just hard. It's so hard to watch at the moment. This is a problem that I've got at the moment with the whole benchmark of 2018 as well. We turned it over consistently during that season. We weren't the most adept and skilled team throughout that season, but the one thing that we had in spades that worked incredibly well was our forward line structure, with Jesse Hogan and Tom McDonald, obviously, the prime of his career, and it's sad to see what's happening with Tom at the moment. He seems pretty robotic and low on confidence, and I'm now starting to think that we might not see a return to that player that we all envisage and we all hope for. But structurally, we'll set up a lot better with our forward line. But the other thing that happened during that season was we just created a lot of chaos in our forward half. And when I say chaos, I know BT used to say it on the commentary. He used to do my nut in, to be honest, when he used to say, "Oh, chaos, chaos." And I was like, the only good thing about that was the fact that we were very good at penning it in our own half and giving ourselves repeat forward entries because our pressure was exceptional. And a lot of teams can get by on winning games of footy when their pressure is sustained for 2.5, 3 quarters. And that's what we did. I can't recount, and I still haven't been able to recount, aside from probably the Adelaide game in the Northern Territory, a 4-quarter performance from Simon Goodwin. Melbourne consistently played 2.5, 3 quarters at best under Simon Goodwin over the journey when they're playing well. So I think the thing that gets lost on people is the fact that we've never necessarily been a very skilled team, especially by foot. But the one thing that held us in good stead was obviously the brand that he talks about in our contested footy and our stoppage work and our ability to be able to trap the ball inside our forward 50 through tackling and harassing and pressuring the ball carrier. So when those elements go out of your game and we don't have the same structural setup that we do in the forward line at the moment, then unfortunately, given the nature of the players that we've recruited and the way that we've moulded them into these contested ball-winning players, not necessarily these adept, well-skilled players, then you're running the gauntlet if you don't do those key fundamentals, pressure and harassing and chasing and trying to keep the ball in your forward half. And that was so evident last night that when the skills are off, and they were very off last night, and you don't bring the heat, then Melbourne's best and worst, the gap is so disproportionate. It's disgusting. And that's what kills me at the moment.
Just a couple of points about that. I think you're right in terms of my least favourite phase, the one would, our intensity in 2018 and since under Goodwin's been, our one wood's been that intensity and pressure. And but in the 2 years since, pretty much all the clubs have that now in their, the best teams like Brisbane. That's why, their one wood is that as well. And so we don't have a comparative advantage. And certainly Richmond are the top of that particular heap, and they're still we're off them, for instance. The other thing is the zone setup now is, every team's running them. They're more sophisticated even than they were 2 years ago. And I think now there's a much greater emphasis on the skilled kick. I think of a player like Suckling who can hit that 45-degree kick into the corridor, or the ability to weight a ball into space. Someone like a Bruce who can chip the ball into a hole to get over the top of a zone. That takes a particular skill, a highly skilled kick, and we just don't have those sorts of players who can regularly do that. We've got, Track can do that, but he can also turn it over. And I think that the game has gone away from us a bit because of our recruiting decisions. We still have to play with that intensity, and last night we didn't, and we'll get opened up at any time we don't bring that intensity. We're going to get opened up, particularly if you also turn it over. But I think the game's gone away from us a bit in terms of what cattle we've got and what skills we have.
How much stock can you put into that 4-day break? Port had the 5-day break. We just look flat. Usually we play with that high energy game and say what you will about the skill errors and lack of connection. As a result of that, we still usually tackle and pressure and get numbers to the contest, but there was none of that last night. There simply just was no effort as well. How much stock can we put into this 4-day break? We're going to see a lot of clubs are going to be in the same boat. But it's how much can we put into that, George? Can we use that as an excuse?
I don't think we can use it as an excuse, and simply because we were lousy right from the very start of the game. Now, even with a 4-day break, you'd think they'd have some sort of run in their leg, or there should be some run in their legs when the game starts. But we were hopeless right from the very start.
Oh yeah.
You'd think the effects of a 4-day break or a short break would be felt in the last quarter. Port only had one day longer break than us, and they were on right from the very start. There's simply no excuse. There's something else going on that I can't understand. The kicking scenario we've talked about, we were just as bad with the handballing. What's the excuse for that? I just can't put my finger on it. The lack of pressure we've talked about briefly. We had 4 tackles inside the forward 50 for the whole game. For the whole game, it's just you're never going to win a game when you've got that sort of turnover. And 2 of those tackles were from Pickett. I don't know what the others were doing. There was just no effort right from the start.
To be fair, the ball didn't spend a lot of time in our forward line, and when it did, it usually went straight to one of their players who took it out. So there wasn't much time to
because we didn't
tackle
do anything.
because we didn't have players there.
I have to say I'm not sure that I agree. I mean, for me, watching it right from the first opening bounce, the thing that jumped out at me straight away, and I pretty much put the cue in the rack almost immediately, was they looked fatigued right from the beginning. I take the point that at the beginning of the game they should be on, and I'm definitely not saying this is an excuse. I think it's a reason. But Daisy mentioned at half-time, she mentioned the phrase dead legs. They looked dead in the legs, and so did Podgy after the game. He also mentioned that, so it was interesting from 2 players' perspective that they both mentioned that same thing, that just the run wasn't there. I'm not using that as an excuse. I just think that's why they weren't on. The other factor, though, George, as your point, is that they also weren't mentally on. They just were not mentally into the game. And for me, the frustration was the club during the week. They chose to put Burgess on the Talking Points podcast, pumping up the whole 4-day fitness thing, that they're ready. In fact, unlike other clubs, they're going to play through this break. We talked about it last week, unchanged. We touched on it just before with Adrian was talking about the decision-making at the club. And I, to be honest, have to question Goodwin's decision-making in the lead-up to the game. It's his job to get the players mentally ready. Whether you think they were fatigued or not, they were 100% weren't mentally ready. There's no argument about that. And then to choose Tom McDonald, I've supported what you said, George, in terms of choosing him, selecting him, but he looked incredibly unready for AFL football. He didn't look in any way ready for footy. He's, bringing him in a third tall, and someone who was so obviously lacking mobility. There was a kick from Salem that he would have swallowed. It was a bad kick, another bad kick from forward entry. But in 2018, he would have marked it. He didn't get anywhere near it. And so I'm just sort of a bit gobsmacked at the decision-making in the club, and it really concerns me, to be honest.
Before we move on to selection, I'll ask Adrian, because you were pretty heated about the 4-day break and it not being an excuse. So do you want to enlighten our listeners about that?
I just think Port Adelaide, 5-day break, not much of a difference. And pick you up on the point from before. Well, the reality is Melbourne have spruiked the appointment of Darren Burgess, and so much so that they've gone online and spoken about his influence and how he'd set them up and, given themselves the best opportunity to get through this period. We're fit and healthy at the moment. At the end of the day, Simon Goodwin had an opportunity if some players were a bit sore and a bit tired to rotate, an extra 2 or 3 players out of the side. So no excuses for me. And even Simon Goodwin said it himself in his post-match presser and in some of his comments during the week before the Port game. He said the same thing. He said, we've set ourselves up for the reality of COVID footy. We knew that this might happen. We knew that we might have to play games in quick succession. So if that's the type of rhetoric that's coming out of the head coach and our elite performance manager, that it's not going to be an issue and we'll just play through it, then as supporters, what else can we do? Like, we need to take them on face value when they're talking about the fitness and health of the players. And again, Port had 1 day less than us. And yeah, I honestly don't think it was an excuse whatsoever. So when I hear supporters talking about that 4-day break, well, do you know what? The proof will be in the pudding for me when Port Adelaide take on, I think it's the Western Bulldogs, off a 4-day break. Let's see what they dish up off a 4-day break. If Port Adelaide go out and win that game convincingly, or even if they win it and they look fresh, then there's your answer. So
And I think
I don't even want it to come to that, but I'm actually going to watch that game with some genuine interest now, just to, douse the flames of the 4-day break excuse.
Yeah.
I think you'll find, though, that it'll have a huge impact through this period of time, because I've been following that break issue for the last few years, and there's definitely a statistical disadvantage for teams off even a 6-day break. The amount of times they lose the following week, particularly if travels in the mix. 4 days, I just think that they weren't ready. I think he was completely wrong. It was evident. You could just tell. And it was interesting that, as I said, that the Hodge pointed it out. And I mean, I don't think it's an excuse either. But if you think they had Rivers, Jordan, Bedford, Neil Bullen, Brown, Wagner, Spargo, Smith, all ready and fresh, not having played any footy, ready to go. I think there was a disconnect between Burgess's assessment of the team and reality, and Goodwin's taken it on board when the reality should have been he should have put 3, 4, 5 players through that team, and Tom McDonald shouldn't have been one of them.
I'll ask Adrian, because you got the soccer background. I'm not sure if you played soccer, but can you make how much of a comparison between footy and soccer in terms of those short turnarounds when the AFL is such a physical game? And I know, soccer's not a contact sport, but there is some physicality in it, but obviously not as much as AFL. So is there a comparison there? I mean, I'm not a sports scientist. I don't know. In your amateur opinion, what do you think?
The first point, soccer is very physical. I always stick up for soccer when it comes to my Aussie rules / cricket mates that think that I follow a soft sport. It's not soft at all. I played soccer at various levels for 4 or 5 years. I still play indoor, but indoor is just a bit of fun. It's not really that physical. You can't actually tackle properly. But anyway, the point is, I think it's not necessarily an argument around, soccer versus footy and the physicality, because it is quite different from week to week in terms of what parts of your body that you manage. Certainly from, the hips down with soccer. It's very delicate, and it's an area of, the body that you don't want to have any problems with. Soft tissue injuries are obviously the killer when it comes to soccer, because it's such an important part of the game. But I don't think that's probably the argument here. I think Darren Burgess and his involvement with the club and having worked for Liverpool and worked for Arsenal, it's his understanding of working with such elite athletes in such an elite environment with technology and and data and different gizmos that, God, I guess Melbourne have never seen before in their life. They would have never had the intel and the IP that he brings to the table. And he would probably understand the body, the management, and the loads of the players better than any other elite performance manager in the league. And I don't want to have a go at him, but the reality is, I come back to that point. If Tom McDonald comes into the team and they're saying that he's fresh, raring to go, he's fit, he's going to make an impact, and he puts in the woeful performance that he did last night and has literally no impact on the contest whatsoever, then I do tend to agree that, yes, I'm probably being a little bit harsh, and I'll wait for that Port Adelaide versus Bulldogs game to give me some level of assessment around a 4-day break. I do agree. The shorter breaks obviously kill you. That was evident when we were in 2017, went on that, I think, 4-game winning run after Tom McDonald kicked that winning goal against West Coast over in the West, which was an amazing result. I'll never forget that one. And we had to back it up with a 5-day break against Sydney on a Friday night, back in Melbourne. Now, the players had obviously got on the red eye that night. They were back in Melbourne on the Sunday morning / mid early arvo, and you could clearly see the fatigue in the players. I think Sydney kicked something like 110 to start the game, and it was blatantly obvious that break had absolutely killed the players. They played something like 4 games in 19 or 20 days. So I am probably being a little bit too harsh, but I think if Darren Burgess gives the all clear, and I have no doubt in my mind that the autonomy and the free rein that Darren Burgess gets to make those decisions around fitness and health of the players is at the absolute optimum. They would say, Darren, what do you reckon, mate? Are we going to play this player? They're feeling a little bit of a niggle here. Is it worth it? Knowing now what we've seen last night, on that evidence, if there are, say, 3, 4, 5 players who have been passengers over the course of the night because they haven't been fit or they're not going to perform close to their optimum, then you got to look at the team selection and the decision making from Darren and Simon Goodwin and his coaches. Because as you guys know, and as everyone knows now in the AFL, if you're 5% off, that can be the difference. That can be the difference between being in the game or getting blown away these days. It's so vitally important that players gut run for as long as they can over the course of a match. So that's the disappointing thing for me, that if they knew that, hey, perhaps we needed to rest 3 or 4 players and they chose not to, and then that has a direct impact on the way that we play and the performance that we saw last night, then I'm actually really disappointed in Darren Burgess and the coaches if they knew that they had a chance to rest a few more players but just took the gamble because of the magnitude of the game. So it's a balancing act. It's a difficult one to answer. We'll never know the actual answers because we're not between the 4 walls, as they say. But I guess that's as much as we can infer or take out of it when you think about it.
Yep. Selection. We went in with the 3 tools, which in theory I'm not adverse to, but what really baffled me was that at times we were playing track in the forward line as another marking option. When you've got 3 tools in there anyway, or meant to be there. There were only 2 times we kicked it to a leading forward to advantage. One time the ball went straight to Jackson, who dropped a sitter, should have marked that. The other time May kicked it down Weed's throat, who obviously marked it and kicked a nice goal. But I think playing 3 tools on what they knew would be a dewy deck was a mistake. George, selection of 3 tools. We've thrown this up all year, knowing that we had sort of this, I won't call it embarrassment of riches because they're certainly not producing the gold at the moment. But, we've flirted with this idea. We got it. Nothing happened.
Yeah, it's the benefit of hindsight in this particular case. And I think Simon Goodwin alluded to it in his post-match conference, we still don't know whether three talls would have worked or not because we were just so bad in the game. I wasn't worried about the selection of the three talls because it was an opportunity to exploit Port's backline. In the previous game that they had against St Kilda, they really struggled. And Westhoff, for example, spent most of his time in the back line trying to stop the ball coming in, which they were unsuccessful at. So here was an opportunity to stick some more talls in because they've only got Cleary's tall, but he's not a great backman. Jonas and Hartlett were the real core of their back line, but they really didn't have a great deal else there. Not that we actually saw them in action all that much during this game. So the selection, I think the idea was right, but the problem was the players around those three talls and the way that even those three talls played, but that was across the board. So the only good things about the selection, I think we got some more game time into Jackson. We got some more game time into Lockhart, and I think they're going to cement their spots in the side. But I think this week is going to be the real test of the selection capabilities that we've got. We've got to see something different from what we've seen in these past couple of weeks.
Big man, anything to add in terms of selection?
Just that with the two things is I don't mind the three talls. That's sort of a bit neither here nor there, and to some degree, what I did mind is, exactly as Adrian said, is that, we haven't seen them train. Obviously, they're not playing VFL. Completely, of course, trusting the club. So, of course, and when they chose Tom McDonald, in my mind, I had him, up, raring to go, potentially even playing on the wing as in that role that he's played up and down the ground in 2018 to a degree. He looked heavier than he did before he before he got injured in that game a couple of games ago. His lack of mobility I was shocked. So I think, for me, it wasn't so much the decision about three talls. It was Tom McDonald is not AFL ready. I can't see him playing. Surely he won't play next week unless they take Jackson out of the team. And then the other decision, Swallow. Did we really need
you always call him
Sparrow?
You always call him
sorry,
Swallow.
Sparrow. I don't know why. Maybe I want Swallow.
Wrong bird.
Well, did we really need another inside mid when we've got, the one that annoys Goodwin's questions about Brayshaw's time? But it seems like we've got a surfeit of inside mids, and I assumed actually he'd be playing in the back line, but that wasn't the case.
We played Harms. I thought I praised the coaching staff of taking Harms out of the back line and sort of playing him a bit more in the middle, but a bit in the forward line as well. And he's back in the back line again. I don't know what's happening there. But the one that you mentioned, Brayshaw, I don't know what to do with Brayshaw. I think maybe he has to spend some time out of the team. I've sort of been putting that off, putting it to the back of my mind, but I don't know.
It's an interesting situation with him. I think Brayshaw is basically an inside mid, and because we've got Viney, Oliver, and then we've reintroduced Harms and Petraka into the middle, that he just hasn't got a role in there anymore. And when we tried him on the wing last year, it failed miserably. He just doesn't seem to be able to play in any other position at all. Following Harms' efforts in this game, I'll be dragging Harms out of the middle and leaving him out of the middle. But unless we can find a role for Brayshaw at his best, then, does he have a role there at all?
We can't just find role. He's either good enough to get in the team or he's not.
Yeah.
Adrian, you were getting stuck into Brayshaw as well.
Yeah, I was. I was because I've got his number on my jumper, so that doesn't help. And funnily enough, I haven't worn my Melbourne Demons jumper, the most recent vintage since the prelim in 18, and I was over in Perth as well. Horrible day.
Yes.
I'll never forget it for all the wrong reasons. Beautiful trip though. Enjoyed it with one of my close friends.
Great trip.
Yeah, that was a great trip.
Except the trip home, but
yeah.
I enjoyed that trip as well.
Trip home was grim on the plane on the red eye with all the Demon Army, and everyone was speculating and talking about it. And I didn't want a bar of it. I just chucked my headphones in and I said a few apologies to Duxie and all the cheer squad members. I said, I'm sorry guys, I'm done. I just need to be in my own little world for the moment. But first time I'd worn the Brayshaw jumper since then last night. I hadn't pulled it out because I thought I'd cursed Angus, and anyway, I wore it last night and he got even worse. So I don't know if I'll ever bring it out again. Maybe I'll just bring it out when he gets dropped, so then I can't technically curse him. But I've been big on Angus taking some time out, and I think the reality is, for me, if Simon Goodwin's not willing to throw him in the guts for a lot longer than he's getting at the moment, which is, very little, you're hardly seeing Angus given a chance to be rotated into the middle. He's predominantly played on the wing at the moment. If he's not performing on the wing, I think there's a lack of urgency. A lot of people still sticking up for him, saying he's getting played out of position, but I'm sorry, good natural footballers, no matter where they're played, will at least still try and have an impact on the contest, at least try and do their bit for the side, and he's doing anything but at the moment. So I think if there's no role for him, it's pretty simple. You don't have a role in the team. You should be on the sidelines. When Sparrow or Swallow, I'm going to call him Swallow from now on.
That's his name now.
Yeah, no, Swallow for now. I'm going to coin that one on the Debrief podcast. When little Swallow's
trademarked.
It's completely trademarked. When he's getting thrown in the guts for Brayshaw, or he's in a rotation and he's only in his third game of footy and Angus is still sitting out in the wing, well, come on, the writing's on the wall, isn't it? It's obvious that at the moment Simon Goodwin's not going to play him in the middle because he doesn't trust him for whatever reason, which I think is ludicrous because I'm a huge Angus Brayshaw fan. I wouldn't have his number for no reason. I think when he's on the ball, he provides so much, but I think he's low on confidence at the moment. I think the wing position has sucked his footy ability out of him for now. And like I said, if Goody's not prepared to give him a crack on the ball, just because of the fact that we've got Viney and Oliver and Petrarca and Harms and all those other players rotating through there, then I think he's a liability at the moment in the side. And that's why I'd be more, and I'm not a huge fan of that Adam Tomlinson. I never was at GWS, but I think we're better served bringing him back in, or even bringing Oscar Baker back in and giving him a run on the wing than we are giving Angus, continued minutes in a role where he's not really having any say on the contest. I just think it's a futile exercise at the moment. So something's got to give. Either Angus goes out or Goody changes it up and puts Angus in the middle for longer, and we can see if Angus can replicate that form that we saw in 18. I think it's a very, very simple debate for me with Angus Brayshaw.
And the other issue with Brayshaw, I think, in that position is, I'm with you. I mean, if he's in the team, he should be able to find the ball, whatever position. But the wing exposes his lack of pace. And I thought the same thing about, I don't know whether Jones was rotating with Brayshaw, but
he was playing on the wing.
Yeah, I think they were swapping on and off, and it was like, who was going to run slower? They're both, like Jonesy's so slow now. So you bring in McDonald, who's slower than both of them. And suddenly, on a fast deck against a team that loves to move the ball quick, you've got three players who can't run past their shadow, and the wing really exposes that pace issue for Brayshaw and Jones for that matter too.
Well, that's why the whole Tomlinson thing bothers me. And I know, but Adrian, you're not a fan, but we went. Well, it's not that we went hard to get him, but we targeted him, and the guy can't get a game. And we got him because we had two slow guys on the wing, and they're back there, and he can't even can't even play a game of footy at the moment. So what's the use of that?
I reckon what Goody should do is line the four of them up, or the three: Tom McDonald, Jones, Tomlinson and Brayshaw and say whoever gets to that line 200 metres in the distance plays next week and the others don't.
That's under 12 stuff. Adrian, you're very harsh on Ed Langdon as well. You weren't happy with a couple of his efforts in terms of putting his body on the line. I've actually been a fan of Langdon this year, but I did notice one of the efforts last night. But I think you were very harsh on him because not every player is a guy that puts the body on the line. But then again, you don't want to see it. Do you want to elaborate on that for our audience?
Yeah, no, I think in retrospect, I was still a little bit hungover, and we're in isolation at the moment, so I'm probably drinking one too many red wines or one too many VBs when I'm watching the Ds at the moment. I normally, to be honest with you, I don't like to get too inebriated when I'm watching the footy because I just like to take it in and get a really good understanding of how the game's panning out and analyse it properly. But, probably had a moment this morning doing the podcast where I look back on it now. I even had a chat to a friend about it and said, I was probably a bit harsh on Ed Langdon because there are certain elements of his game that I have enjoyed. He's definitely made a difference with the way that we transition the ball up the field, having a pacey winger, and that meters gained in the modern game is so important. So, I probably went too hard on him. I've never been one for soft players. I've never been one to enjoy seeing players not go when it's their time to go. There were a couple of incidents I recall where it wasn't like he was backing into a Jonathan Brown. He was backing into a contest against a player that was of a similar size. And I know got a little bit spooked and had a look and didn't go. And, I don't know if you're aware of it, but I was a massive Jack Watts detractor for that very reason. I know it's a bit harsh on Jack, and I actually agree. It was a phenomenal kick for us, one of the best field kicks we've had in the last decade. And I guess just given his size, it used to piss me off that he didn't crash packs and put his body on the line when from my personal perspective, I wanted him to. And I grew up in the bush, so I used to get belted up all the time. I'm an absolute weed, very skinny man, and I used to come off the field battered and bruised and probably worse off than most blokes because I didn't have much weight to throw around. But I just learnt that when it's your time to go and put your body on the line, that's what you do for the team. And I don't know. It's probably just a personal thing. I don't enjoy seeing players in those moments shirking contests. And I saw it last night, but I must admit I was definitely too harsh on him, having thought about what I said. And I think you're right. You need to have those players that play their role and they're outside players and give you that run and carry. And I think Ed, over the journey, when we look back on him in a few years, we'll say that was one that we got right. And I guess it's just magnified when you have a horrible night, as we did last night as well. Everyone's in the pressure cooker. Everyone's in the firing line. Even the blokes that aren't expected to be the physicality monsters like Ed, even they cop some crap. So, in my moment of madness, I gave him a clip. But, no, I'll back him up. I think he's been a good recruit so far.
Boys, was there any positives from the game? Because I'm struggling. I thought Stephen May played his role and beat his opponent, but I'm struggling to find sort of any other positives. George, I'll go to you first. You got any positives?
This should be as short as the video on the Melbourne Footy Club site showing the goals for the game.
Yes.
So I think it went for 1 minute and 8 seconds. Positives, I think the only thing that I took out of the game was the post-match interviews from Goodwin and Stephen May, where they were both obviously very pissed off with what they'd seen in front of them during the game. And hopefully that's enough to motivate them and others to make the necessary changes and so that we don't have to watch that again. But on the ground, again, just getting those games into Lockhart and Jackson and Sparrow will be good for the future. But really, there wasn't much else around the ground to really get enthused about.
I like Sparrow, or Swallow, I should say. I thought he played all right. I mean, nothing outstanding, only 15 possessions, but
yeah, he is going to be a good player, and playing in a game like that was pretty heartbreaking for him as an individual. But he held his end up, which is all you can expect from a young player at this stage. So
we called it last week as well. We wanted him in, and he got in. But Bin Man, any silver lining on what was a pretty shitty night?
Yeah, it was interesting listening to the no merger and thinking back to that period, and sort of in my mind I was thinking it was earlier than that, because I sort of think the 88 to about 98 period was all one sort of pretty depressing period for one reason or another. But I always used to love watching Robbie Flower play when in losses, and Stephen Ick, and the players I most respect for Melbourne aren't necessarily the best players even. They're the ones who play well in losses, and I put a lot of store in that. And funnily enough, I thought Langdon, I can't recall him not going for a contest, but it's obviously more than possible. But I thought he ran. He was the only player that ran for the whole game, and for me, his running continued to gut run, and I just really made a mental note to think of. He kept going right to the end. He left it all out there, and I don't know that many players did. And I think Swallow had he cracked in and did what he was asked to do, and took his turn. And he was certainly one not going to be questioned for his intensity and at the ball. May had a pretty good night, I thought, but I think May's turning it over a bit too much for my liking. But I'd say Langdon and Sparrow would be my two highlights. Positives.
Adrian, I'll let. Any positives besides the fact that the game's over?
Might have been a step closer to Goodwin not being our coach in the immediate future. So, I know it's easy to get negative when you see your club dish up performances like that. But I just had this nagging question last night, watching it unfold, saying to myself, can I deep down truly believe that Simon Goodwin has the capabilities of turning the fortunes of this current side around and achieving what the ultimate aim was for the club when he was introduced into this succession plan with Paul Roos? And at the moment, my immediate answer is I cannot see in any way, shape or form Simon Goodwin being crowned a premiership coach of the Melbourne Football Club. Even if we were to make finals, I'm at a point now where I don't think our game style stacks up in the heat of those moments. I think it's way too one-dimensional. I don't think we're adaptable and tactically flexible as well. So for me, the positive was I still look at the capability of some of the players that I saw last night. Yes, skill execution was down, but I still looked at a few of the players like Pickett and Jackson, who I've been really impressed with. I know Jackson, hardly touched the ball, but I looked at him last night and some of the, the little things he did, and Pickett as well. And I looked at, I guess, the nucleus of the team, and I know we were completely off the boil, but I still had this, strange optimism that if Goodwin was to get it right at some point, or we were to shake up the coaching department and bring someone in, I still believe the list demographic in terms of its age and its ability has a chance of having a tilt at a premiership over the next 3 to 4 years. And as much as it's depressing to watch what we watched last night, I still think there's time for Melbourne to put that right. And I don't think Simon Goodwin's the man at the moment. I think it's a very difficult scenario given the fact that he signed that 4-year extension at the start of last year. And we've been hit by COVID and all the pressures from a financial point of view and all the challenges that presents if you want to pay out a coach now in this environment. But I still genuinely believe there's a window of opportunity there. I think a lot of it just comes down to game style and players playing on instinct. I just think there's a lot of players who've lost their ability to play the game instinctively and being played in the right position. So, it's weird. I still sit there and watch a lot of our players, and as much as it's frustrating at the moment when you see them turn in performances like that, I don't know. I'm just not going to waver from my belief that I actually do think we have a talented bunch of players. And that's the only thing that's keeping me positive at the moment, that if Simon Goodwin finds the tonic, fair play to him. I would love him to prove the doubters wrong. I'd love him to prove me wrong. It'd be amazing. But if he's not the answer, then maybe the positive in the silver lining that is if someone else comes in that it can change very quickly. This is not a rebuild situation. This is not a time to panic for Melbourne supporters. There is still time for Melbourne to put things right, and performances like last night should never be acceptable, should never be dished up. The supporters don't deserve that crap. We've stuck through thick and thin for so long, but I still believe that with a bit of tinkering and the right person in charge, it might be Goody, he might prove us wrong, it might be someone else. There's still time. So last night is not the end of the road. We've got a great opportunity against Adelaide and obviously North Melbourne, both at Adelaide Oval, which is a happy hunting ground for us, one of the few away grounds that we do enjoy playing at. And if we can get back to 5-5 and Goody can learn a few things along the way, then who knows? We might be able to get this season back on the right track again. So that's my silver lining.
I'm extremely nervous about next week. I can just see it now. I've been seeing it for the last few weeks as Adelaide just continues to lose their game. I so hope they beat North Melbourne this week. But I can just see us coughing up their first win. Just on the draw, we've had a pretty tough draw. Played West Coast, Geelong, Richmond, Brisbane, Port, all arguably top 6 teams. We sit 3 and 5. We'll really know where we are in the next 2 weeks, that's for sure, playing the 2 bottom teams. We lose those 2 guys. It's bottom. Not just bottom 4, it's bottom 2, if not bottom for us this year. We really have to win those, and we've still got games against, Fremantle, Sydney, also bottom 4, and yeah.
There was a post today, Andy, that Adrian, excuse me.
You need some water there. I don't have any for you.
No, sorry.
Take some water, I'll get. George, you want to jump in?
Yeah, it's good we're in isolation from the sounds of things.
While he suffers from COVID.
That's the great fear, isn't it, for this game against Adelaide? And I think their changes have to be swung left, right and centre this week. The forward line was completely demoralised and ineffective this past week. I think there's questions around the mids that we talked about. So I want to see plenty of changes this week. And if there was a question about the fitness of the players, then there's a third reason to bring in some more players who haven't had a run in recent times.
Any changes in particular? Bennell comes in, providing he's fit, and he was only out because they're managing him. Always just to be worried when players don't play, whether there's something else that they're hiding. But hopefully he's just being managed. But he'd come in.
Yeah, I think the opportunity. Tomlinson was emergency for this game. I saw him and A and B warming up before the game. So, given that we've talked about Brayshaw and Jones on the wing, that doesn't seem to be working at all. I think there's an opportunity there to do some changes. But up forward, Hannon was awful. Melcham was awful again. He's had 2 tackles in the forward 50 in 8 games of football this year. We wonder why the ball keeps coming out of the forward 50. There's a good example of it. I don't think there's anything needs to be changed down the back. Quite happy with the back 6, but certainly up forward and in the middle is where we should see some big changes and good numbers of changes.
Adrian, any particular changes you want to see this week?
Oh, I think, Tom not up to it.
Is he injured? Like we were talking about there's this foot injury from ages ago. It's got to be something related to that.
The foot injury, just for some context sake, is true. I don't know if you guys got any mail on it, but I certainly did. I won't explain who I got it off. He'd probably get pissed off with me. But he had problems, huge problems actually, last year. And if he still has lingering issues with that foot injury, then that's a massive, massive concern for him personally, and obviously for the side when he's playing. I just think I'm with you guys. He just doesn't look up to it at the moment. Doesn't look AFL level at all. He actually threw our structure out of whack last night. We had a good thing going on with Wiedemann and Jackson in the previous 2 weeks, and it's amazing how one player can have such an impact structurally on the way that you set up, especially with your forward line. I think defensively it's a different kettle of fish, and it sounds stupid, but I'm actually really happy with our defence at the moment. I think the lack of pressure from the mids last night meant that Port got a lot of easy looks at goal. I'm not going to pin much on the defenders. I still think that the mix that we've got in the back line is solid. So I'm backing them in for sure. I don't think there will be any changes there. I think T-Mac has to go out. Who you bring in? God. I don't know. Like Tomlinson, I was potting him before, but I think he's an option. I'd rather Adam Tomlinson come in at the moment than a very lacklustre, underperforming, dysfunctional Tom McDonald. Harley Bennell is an obvious that'll come in. I think there'll be a couple of surprises as well. We'll have to drop a few players that probably haven't come up well, or who are suffering a little bit of fatigue in this compressed season. So expect a few surprises, in my opinion, and maybe an Alex Neil-Bullen gives himself a chance to come into the side. I know he's another player that cops it from time to time, but I think he's also a player that can have an impact and brings a lot of heat and pressure. And if he's fresh and comes in and does a role, then I'm not adverse to bringing him in. So, yeah, I'm expecting 3 or 4 changes.
There's also the possibility with Vanders maybe back, but I'm not sure. He was 2 weeks. But I'm not sure if it's been 2 weeks since then. It's been 2 rounds, but not 2 weeks. So he possibly could come back in. We did have someone try to call in, but Adrian was talking at the time. It's on the same thing, and sometimes it kicks the person off who's calling. If you want to call in again, try, and I'll try and merge the calls. But I just didn't want to do it while Adrian was talking and cut him off. Bin Man, are you over? Has it been 2 weeks? Are you over the coronavirus yet?
Yeah, I'm fine now. Actually, I don't know what was going on. I was actually just going to make a gag, and I must have auto-censored myself. But the post that I was going to reference, Adrian might have liked, is it's a win-win next week, because if we win, well, we're still in with a mathematical chance for finals. If we lose, it's one step closer to getting rid of Goodwin, was the thrust of the post. So it's a win-win scenario. It'll be interesting next week, because let's say that fitness wasn't an issue and they were fit. Well, there's no way you can argue that they were mentally switched on, and I think that's the number one KPI for a coach, is to have his players ready on game day. So that's that's really why I sort of, and you combine that with the decisions on selection, I think there's some big queries. There's been a few this year already that have concerned me with Goody's decision making. But on that point, it'll be interesting to see what he does, because fitness shouldn't be an issue next week. We've got a 6-day break. It's a Wednesday night, the game next week. So it's practically a normal break. They'll be fully fine next week. There won't be an issue. I don't think they had any injury concerns out of that game. So I'll be curious to see what he does. It won't be because of injury or fatigue. It'll be discipline. One thinks Tom McDonald surely will come out. I think he implied that almost at the presser. I can't see Jones. Jones looks not in the right headspace for mine and doesn't look. He's certainly not fast enough. So I'll be really curious to see what they do. And if he swings the axe, that's a pretty big message, I reckon, particularly given just a few days ago he was talking about an unchanged side unless we get injuries. So, I think it'll be really interesting to see what his decision is. But he's got to take some responsibility himself for their lack of preparedness for that game.
You would hope that the unchanged side was contingent on the fact that we kept winning and not just keep players in if we're losing and losing badly. Yeah. So they might have to swing the axe. Now, we do have a caller. I'm hoping it didn't cut Adrian off. Caller, you on the air?
Yeah, g'day, Durry Pirate, long-time listener, first-time caller.
Thank you. How are you going, Durry Pirate? I actually love that username.
I'm hoping Adrian's still on. I want to hear Hordo's thoughts. I don't know if he got to see Josh Marnie's interview today on the Melbourne website, but they're classing last night as a one-off, much like last year, and the prelim, and I'm struggling to see why the club can't see what we can.
Well, hopefully they review this game. Adrian, can you hear the caller?
Yeah, no, I heard it. I almost vomited. Good point about the non-review of the prelim against West Coast. That was an absolute disgrace, in my opinion. What company or business, it doesn't matter if you're a footy club, doesn't review a piece of work, right? It's a very simple fundamental. It doesn't matter what organisation, company, institution, whether you're an accountancy firm, a friggin' construction company, a small, building company, whatever. It doesn't matter. The fact that they didn't do that kind of, in my mind, speaks volumes about the culture down at the football club at the moment under Josh Marnie's guidance, and that's why I've been pretty firm in my stance against him for a long time. To hear that type of rhetoric that he's pushing again, that it's a once-off and it's an aberration, well, the fact of the matter is, Josh, we're 3-5. We lost a couple of close games because we haven't been able to capitalise in those pressure moments, which for me is a coaching problem. It's transmitted directly from the coaching group that they don't understand how to compose themselves in the moments that matter. It's an unforgiving industry. It's a results-given industry. So, Josh, again, we won 5 games of footy last year. So for a senior figure of our football club to continue to trot out that type of rhetoric is utterly staggering. And look, I also put this point. I made this point on the debrief this morning. If we go and beat Adelaide and North Melbourne in the next 2 weeks, well, that's our minimum. We're expected to beat 18th and 17th on the ladder. Right? We go 5-5 and they start thinking it's rainbows and lollipops again. I keep coming back to it. The main reason we got Simon Goodwin into this position is to be the stepping stone after Paul Roos to win a flag. The ultimate succession plan under Peter Jackson and Paul Roos into this new era under Goodwin and Pert was to lay the foundations for Simon Goodwin in his 3rd, 4th or 5th year to execute on the ultimate aim of that business plan. And that business plan was to break our 56-year premiership drought. Are we any closer? No. We're actually going backwards at the moment. So Josh Marnie wow. I'm going to keep it civil. I'm not going to, I'm not going to go off my head and walk off the bed soon, in a red hot stink and get angry about hearing those words from him, because at the end of the day, I'm not surprised. That is the culture that has been set up by the football club. I'm sorry, but Simon Goodwin saying that these next 2 weeks will define our season. You're wrong, Simon. These next 2 weeks will keep our season alive. It'll get us back to 5-5. It's not about finishing 7th or 8th. It's not about just making the finals. Look at Essendon. Essendon haven't won a final since 2004. Their fans are absolutely ruthless. They're vicious because they know that even when they break their finals drought and win a final, deep down they know that that is not what a football club stands for. A football club stands for winning premierships, winning flags, and ask Collingwood supporters about that, all the flags that they have missed out on. They've got a 15-27 record. They've won 15 and lost 27, for God's sake. They should be streaks ahead, and it grinds their gears that they're not the most successful club in the league. So Josh Marnie, the club exists, and football clubs exist to win premierships. They don't exist to get their season back on track in the next 2 weeks and give themselves a sniff of finals, because we know deep down as supporters at the moment, the reality is our football and our game plan is not going to stack up in finals anyway. We're not going to win a final, and even if we do win a final, we're not going to get past a semi-final stage. And what's the difference between making a semi-final under a coach that's never going to coach us to the ultimate glory, in my opinion? So it kills me hearing that. I'm just sick and tired of that rhetoric. That should be absolutely gone from the very fabric of this football club. And Peter Jackson, love him, wish he was still at the club, and a few other people that left the club in recent times, you would never catch them dead saying such a thing. Last night was the most unacceptable performance that we've had since the 2018 prelim. So for him to turn around and say that, I think is utterly disrespectful to the fans that stand by the club. Hate that. Well, I'm angry again.
Well said.
That was some Dorothy Dixon.
All right, boys, I think we're going to leave it there. Adrian, I really want to thank you for your time joining us tonight, and you want to plug the debrief and any of the other stuff you're doing, as well as the No Merger podcast. Where can everyone find the podcast and your other podcasts?
I think you guys have plugged it very well. The debrief, it's just on Apple and Spotify and Google and all your favourite podcasting apps. So we normally do a Monday review show and a Thursday preview show of each game, but obviously that's out of kilter at the moment with the fixtures during this COVID season. So yeah, you can have a listen. It's very passionate. It's very raw. As I said before, sometimes we probably say a few things that we regret, but we always put it to air. We never take out any edits. We stand by our words, and we hold ourselves to account. So that's what I enjoy about it. All the boys pick up on points that we've made in previous weeks and said, well, hang on, this is what you were saying the previous week. So we're certainly not turncoats. We'll stand behind our opinions and cop it when we deserve it. So that's how you can find it. And then the No Merger series, similar situation, Spotify, Apple, Google, all your favourite podcast apps. And the only thing I'd ask from Melbourne supporters that enjoyed the No Merger series is if you can give it 5 stars on Apple and give it a nice review, then it just helps it crawl in the App Store, and it gives it better discoverability. So it means that more people can listen to it. If people can give it the big thumbs up and 5 stars, massively appreciative of anyone that listens to it and does that. And hopefully you really enjoy it, and along the way we can debunk a few myths and make Melbourne look a bit better off from that time.
What do you think your listenership for the No Merger, outside of the Melbourne Hawthorn sphere of fans will be? Do you think there is the market for people that don't support those two clubs?
Yeah, I think so. I think we tried. That's why we tried to make it with that in mind. So I guess we'll have an understanding in the next couple of months if that rings true. We've got a few marketing ideas around that with our podcast partner, Australian Radio Network, and how we can serve it out to more general sports fans rather than just AFL fans, because we think it's a really good story. And obviously, you guys live through it and understand it a lot better than I do, having been involved with the club and supported the club for longer. But we hope, we do hope that it catches fire, and just the general sports punter that doesn't even follow footy gravitates towards this story, because I think it's fascinating. The idea of merging two clubs in such a quick period of time, two very historic clubs, two very proud clubs, is something that these days people, as I said before, probably struggle to comprehend or wrap their brains around. So, I think we're hopeful. Look, if it at the end of the day, if it only picks up traction with the AFL community and in particular Hawthorn and Melbourne fans, as long as it elicits that response that I'm hoping for, that people look at the Melbourne Football Club and their involvement in the merger in a different light, then I'll probably walk away from this project being a content and satisfied man. Just because I love Melbourne so much, and I just hate seeing their name get dragged through the mud and people poking fun at them the way they did in '96 and the way they continue to do. But it's hard because there's not much we can do as supporters. Maybe I'm doing my little bit in respects with this series, but we can't really influence what happens at board and administration and playing level. It's kind of out of our hands. But if the club can turn it around and pick up their results, and we get our just desserts as supporters, happy days. But just trying to play my little part in giving Melbourne a better image.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. Hopefully we can do some type of collaborations between Debrief and Deemerland in the future, and certainly we'll do that if we ever win that ultimate prize, because it'll be a good one to celebrate. Thank you very much, Adrian, for joining us tonight. Thank you, B-Man. Thank you, George. And we'll see you next week. Let's go, those Demons.
Go Red Legs.